They say the moment between life and death replays your entire life before your eyes. They were wrong. At least, they were for me. In that hovering moment between consciousness and the void, I didn't see my first smile. I didn't see graduation day, and I didn't see my unfinished dreams. The only thing I remember with haunting clarity wasn't an image. It was a sound. It was the sharp intake of breath from the surgeon as he looked at the scans of my spine. Not a word, just a compressed breath. A tiny, almost invisible sound, but it held the weight of a sentence. It was the sound of a life snapped in two. But even before that sound, there was the silence of the snowstorm, the bone-deep cold of Denver as night fell. I was there, on an I-70 mountain pass as slick as glass, not for my own reasons. I was there for Chloe, my sister, the art prodigy. I was there for her masterpiece, an oil painting that cost as much as my entire year of tuition, which had to be delivered to her first exhibition. That exhibition, according to my mother, was the future of this family. And my life, apparently, a minor detail. When I saw their headlights, a part of me believed I was saved. I tried to speak, to scream that I couldn't feel my legs, that something inside me had shattered, but my pleas for help were drowned out.
Richard, the painting! If it's damaged, Chloe's career could be over!
The rescue team is on the way. Don't make things worse.
They thought that was the end of my story, a burden left behind in the frost. But they were wrong. It wasn't the end. It was the beginning. And in this video, I'm going to tell you in detail how I turned the most horrific night of my life into a weapon, how a girl left for dead could rise from the ashes, silently build an empire, and how 6 years later, I came back and made them pay for every single snowflake that fell on me that night. This isn't a story about forgiveness. This is a story about justice. The silence after their car disappeared was more terrifying than the roar of the storm. Snow began to creep in through the shattered frame, the cold seeping through my jacket, biting into my skin and gnawing away at my last bit of warmth. I tried to call out, but my voice was just a lost whisper. I tried to move, but from the waist down, my body was a stranger. Fear was no longer an emotion. It became a physical entity, a block of ice slowly crushing my chest. I thought I would die there, in that cold metal cage, the last thing I'd see being 2 red taillights fading away. About an hour later, another light cut through the snow. Bigger, warmer. A massive truck had pulled over. A man with a salt and pepper beard and a thick coat got out. He didn't ask a lot of questions. He just looked into my eyes, looked at the state of the car, and immediately called 911. His name was Earl. While we waited for the rescue team, he took his spare blanket, carefully draped it over me through the broken window, and said something I will never forget. "It's cold out, girl. Stay warm." A total stranger, in the middle of a blizzard, showed me the kindness my own family had denied me. At the hospital, my world shrank to white walls, the smell of antiseptic, and the unfamiliar faces of doctors and nurses. After hours of tests and scans, the head surgeon entered my room. He wasn't alone. A nurse and a grief counselor were with him. That's when I knew the news wouldn't be good. He explained it to me in cold clinical terms. L1 spinal cord injury, severe compression, risk of permanent paralysis. It was then that he unconsciously took that sharp breath, the sound that would be forever etched into my mind. He said the chances of me walking normally again were slim. They needed to operate immediately. During all of this, my phone was silent. Not one call, not one text from my parents or Chloe. They were there, at the gallery, celebrating the family's future, while my own future was being decided by a surgeon's scalpel. The first person from my family to visit me on the second day wasn't my parents. It was Mr. Henderson, the lawyer who had worked for my family for 20 years. He brought an expensive fruit basket and a fake smile. He sat by my bed, took my hand, and spoke in a disgustingly gentle voice. "Maya, what a terrible misfortune. The whole family is so worried about you." I was silent. "You know," he continued, "Chloe's exhibition is very important. Your parents have invested so much time and money. A lawsuit or making a scene right now would only complicate things. It could affect the family's reputation and Chloe's career." He looked me straight in the eye, his smile gone, replaced by a cold seriousness. "Be a strong, understanding girl, Maya. Don't turn an accident into a family tragedy." I let go of his hand. In that moment, I understood. I wasn't just alone. I was being silenced. They hadn't come to comfort me. They sent a lawyer to make sure I would stay quiet. But the truth was even more monstrous. That evening, a kind young nurse let me borrow her tablet so I could read the news. Out of some morbid curiosity, I went on Instagram, and I saw it. A photo of Chloe smiling radiantly next to her masterpiece at the exhibition. She was wearing a designer dress, her hair perfect. The caption read, "Art is pain, but the results are so sweet." It was accompanied by shameless hashtags, #ArtIsPain, #AlmostFamous, #DenverArtScene. Dozens of comments praised her beauty and talent. Not a single word about her sister lying in a hospital. The final blow came a few days later when I had to work with the hospital's insurance coordinator. To complete the paperwork, I needed information from my family's policy. And when the coordinator printed out a summary, one line leaped out at me. A claim had been submitted to the insurance company just 5 hours after the accident. It wasn't for medical coverage. It was a claim on a total and permanent disability policy. They hadn't just left me. They had acted immediately to turn my tragedy into a financial gain. They didn't expect me to die. Perhaps they expected me to live the rest of my life in a wheelchair so they could collect a large sum and continue funding their perfect lives. It was then, in that sterile white room, that the physical pain and despair in me ceased. Something else rose up, a cold glacial calm. My tears stopped. My heart stopped breaking. It began to freeze, hardening into something much sharper and more durable. They didn't just want me to be silent. They wanted me to be a number on their balance sheet. And I decided I would show them just how big that number could get. My plan for revenge wasn't born from anger. It was born from that cold, hard truth. The physical therapy room became my forge. Every day was a battle, not with the parallel bars or the heavy weights, but with my own treacherous body. The first steps on numb legs were a humiliation. Every stumble was a sharp reminder of the red taillights in the snowstorm. The therapists looked at me with pity. They talked about perseverance and warrior spirit. They didn't understand. This wasn't warrior spirit. This was distilled hatred. My rage was my fuel. Every drop of sweat that hit the mat wasn't for recovery. It was for tempering. While other patients watched TV or read magazines, I turned my hospital bed into an office and a classroom. With a cheap tablet I bought with my meager savings, I dove into a world my family never thought I could touch: finance, business law, and commercial real estate. I listened to investment podcasts while doing leg lifts. I read stock market reports instead of novels. I learned about real estate investment trusts, how LLCs act as shields, about the flow of cash in mergers and acquisitions. Knowledge became my new armor. Every number, every contract clause was a brick in the fortress I would one day hide inside. My family, just as I predicted, hardly ever showed up. They fulfilled their role by sending a monthly allowance to my account. It wasn't an act of love. It was hush money, a long-distance attempt to soothe their guilty conscience. They didn't know that their guilt money became the first bullets in my arsenal. The day I left the rehabilitation center, no one came to pick me up. I called a taxi myself. I didn't go back to the mansion in the Denver suburbs. I already knew what was waiting for me. Through a few brief calls with the housekeeper, I learned my room was no longer mine. It had become a storage space for Chloe's canvases, frames, and art supplies. My physical space in that house had been erased. I rented a small apartment in a modest neighborhood where no one knew who I was. I found a remote data analysis job, a perfect way to stay hidden. I lived a life of stark minimalism. Every dollar I earned, every dollar from the family allowance, was funneled into a separate investment account. I lived like a ghost, existing in spreadsheets and financial reports, completely invisible to the high society world my family was trying to break into. My first investment wasn't large. It was a calculated decision made after months of research. I bought shares in a REIT specializing in up-and-coming downtown office buildings. I watched it daily. When I saw my small investment begin to turn a profit, even if it was just a few dozen dollars, I didn't feel joy or excitement. I just felt a cold satisfaction. It was proof that my plan could work. Proof that intellect and patience could become a form of power greater than the money and status they possessed. 6 years is a long time. Long enough for a broken 18-year-old girl to become a 24-year-old woman with a singular purpose. Long enough for hair to regrow, for scars to fade, and for my walk, though still carrying a slight confidence-masked limp, to become steady. To my family, I had become a distant memory, a monthly expense, a daughter who had settled for her mediocre lot in life. They were dead wrong. They didn't know that for 6 years, the ghost they created had been silently learning to move in the shadows. And she was waiting for her own perfect storm, waiting for the chance to return, not as a victim, but as a creditor, here to collect everything that was owed with interest. My chance came in the spring of the 6th year, wrapped in a glossy announcement in a prestigious Denver art magazine. Chloe, after years of struggling with smaller shows, was finally having a massive comeback exhibition. My parents, in a final push for social validation, had leveraged nearly everything they owned to rent out the entire Winchester Arts Building, a prime address in the city's art scene. They launched a huge promotional campaign, inviting collectors, influencers, and the press. For them, this wasn't just an exhibition, it was a coronation. What they didn't know was that 3 months before they signed the lease, the entire Winchester building had been acquired by a private investment fund called Phoenix Holdings. The deal was done quietly, legally, through a series of shell corporations, and the head of that anonymous fund, the one who signed the final check, was me. I had been watching that building for 2 years, waiting for the right moment. When I learned it was for sale, I acted decisively. I didn't just buy the gallery, I bought the ground it was built on. I let them prepare. I watched it silently as they poured money into renovating the space, as they printed thousands of expensive invitations, as Chloe smugly gave interviews about her inspiration. I let them build their stage as high and as grand as possible, because I knew the higher the stage, the more devastating the fall. 3 days before opening night, I decided it was time to drop the curtain. I walked into the Winchester building on a Tuesday afternoon. The space was filled with organized chaos. Crew members were hanging Chloe's oversized paintings. My mother was loudly directing the lighting team. My father was shaking hands with an art critic. And Chloe, the center of the universe, stood in the middle of the room, smiling proudly. I wore a perfectly tailored navy blue suit. My hair was in a neat bun. In my hand, I held a cane of polished ebony, its head capped with sterling silver. It was no longer a medical aid, it was a scepter. At first, no one noticed me. To them, I was just a stranger, some businesswoman scoping out the space. I walked directly to my mother. "Ma'am," I said, my voice clear and professional. She turned, slightly annoyed at being interrupted. "Yes, can I help you?" She stared at me. A second passed, then 2. The annoyance on her face shifted to confusion, then slowly morphed into horror as memory began to click into place. Maya? She stammered, her voice barely a whisper. The entire room seemed to go silent. My father and Chloe turned. Chloe's smug look soured into a scowl, while my father froze, his socialite smile dropping from his face. "Hello, Mother," I said, devoid of emotion. "It's a beautiful space, but there are a few problems." I handed Mr. Henderson, the lawyer from all those years ago who was also present, a folder. According to our records, the LSE has made significant structural alterations to the load-bearing walls to hang oversized artworks without written consent from the building's owner. This is a material breach of Section 3.1 of the lease agreement. Mr. Henderson's face went pale as he read the documents. You can't." "I can." I cut him off. "Phoenix Holdings, the legal owner of this property, has decided to exercise its rights. Your lease is terminated, effective immediately." "This is our home for a month," my mother screamed, panic replacing her shock. "We paid." "Your deposit will be refunded, minus the cost of repairing the damages you have caused," I replied coldly. "You have 24 hours to remove all personal property from the premises. As of 5 p.m. tomorrow, my security team will take over. Anyone unauthorized will be considered a trespasser." Chloe finally found her voice, which trembled with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "You can't do this to me. This is the event of my life. You're ruining everything." I turned to her, looking my sister in the eye for the first time in 6 years. "Ruining everything?" I asked, my voice still even but sharp as a razor. 6 years ago, on a snow-covered mountain pass, you left me when I couldn't feel my legs. You chose a few painted canvases over me. That was ruining everything. This— I tapped my cane on the marble floor, the sound echoing through the space. "Is just business. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have another appointment." I turned and walked away, leaving behind a dead silence, half-hung paintings and a family watching their paper empire crumble to dust. I thought that after reclaiming the Winchester building, it would be over. I thought silence would follow, but I had underestimated the desperation of narcissists when they are cornered. 2 days later, late in the evening, my apartment doorbell rang. It wasn't a polite ring. It was a series of frantic, angry pounds on the door. I looked through the peephole. All three of them were there. My mother, her hair a mess. My father, his face red with fury. And Chloe, terror-streaked, her eyes puffy from crying. I took a deep breath and opened the door, keeping the security chain latched. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" My mother shrieked, her voice raw. "After everything we did for you, fed you, educated you, gave you a life, how dare you do this to your own family?" "A life?" I responded, my voice terrifyingly calm. "Is the life you're referring to the one that was left to freeze to death in a wrecked car?" My father pushed forward. "It was an accident, a misunderstanding. Do you know how much money you've destroyed? Our entire life savings. The family's reputation. It's all gone." "A reputation built on cruelty and lies isn't worth keeping," I said. Chloe sobbed, pointing at me. "You did this because you're jealous of me. You never had any talent, so you want to destroy those who do. You're a monster." I listened to all their accusations, the same familiar words they had used to manipulate me for years. But this time, they had no weight. They were just meaningless noise. I looked at the three people before me, people who had shared my home, who shared my last name, and I felt nothing. No anger, no pain, no hatred. Just a void, an acceptance that they would never change. They would never apologize, because in their world, they had done nothing wrong. "I'm not jealous of you, Chloe," I said, my voice holding its calm. "I pity you, because your talent is watered with the suffering of others, and one day when there's no one left to sacrifice for you, you'll have nothing." I looked at my parents one last time. You didn't lose a family because you never really were one. You were just a group of people living together with selfish calculations. I gently closed the door, the click of the security chain sounding like a final full stop. Their shouting continued in the hallway for a few more minutes before fading away. It was the last time I ever heard their voices. The next week, the Winchester building was covered in scaffolding, but not for demolition. The old sign was taken down. In its place was a new name, etched in gleaming bronze letters. The Phoenix Foundation. I didn't sell it. I didn't lease it. I turned it into everything I never had. The glamorous exhibition space was redesigned into open, light-filled art studios. The upstairs executive offices became counseling rooms and business skills workshops for artists. The basement, where they once stored wine for parties, was now a free printmaking and ceramics workshop for young people who couldn't afford their own. The Phoenix Foundation didn't just offer space. It offered full scholarships, mentorship programs with established artists, and most importantly, a safe community for talented individuals from difficult backgrounds, for those who had been abandoned, abused, or dismissed by their own families. On opening day, there was no red carpet, no champagne, no arrogant art critics, just young artists, volunteers, and people who had known brokenness. The air was filled with laughter, music, and an almost tangible sense of hope. I stood at the podium, looked out at the crowd, and said, "I'm not going to tell you a sad story. Instead, I want to talk about scars. People often say that time heals all wounds. But I believe some wounds never truly heal. They scar and the question isn't how to erase the scar, but what we do with it." I paused, looking around the room that was once a symbol of my pain. This place we're standing in was once intended for a different purpose, but today we give it a new one. If you have ever been left in the dark, if your voice has ever been silenced, if your talent has ever been treated as a burden, then this place is for you. The Phoenix Foundation is built on a simple belief. Your scar is not a sign of weakness. It is proof that you survived. It does not define who you are, but it can become the strength from which you build who you want to be. My journey of revenge ended the day I closed that door. But my journey of healing, and hopefully the journey for many of you, is only just beginning, right here, right now.